president is very much being tested on the world stage, not just when it comes to China, but also when it comes to Iran. And he talked about that. In fact, he actually talked about the former Secretary of State, John Kerry, who he says he believes is breaking the law. Let's listen.
What did Iran do to prompt you to send an aircraft carrier to the region?
Well, they were threatening, and we have information. We have information that you don't want to know about. They were very threatening, and we just want to have. We have to have great security for this country and for a lot of other places.
Is there a risk of military confrontation, sir?
I guess you could say that always, right? Isn't it? I mean, you know, always. I don't want to say no, but hopefully that won't happen. We have one of the most powerful ships in the world that's loaded up, and we don't want to have to do anything. What I'd like to see with Iran, I'd like to see them call me. You know, John Kerry speaks to them a lot. John Kerry tells them not to call. That's a violation of the Logan Act. And frankly, he should be prosecuted on that. But my people don't want to do anything that's... Only the Democrats do that kind of stuff, you know? If it were the opposite way, they'd prosecute him under the Logan Act. But John Kerry violated the Logan Act. He's talking to Iran and has many meetings and many phone calls, and he's telling them what to do. That is a total violation of the Logan Act.
All right, that allegation doesn't even smell mildly correct. So fact check this for us.
Like an empty plastic cola bottle trapped in driftwood floating to the shore, John Kerry's back.
He really is the rare combination of a 8-year-old boy. I mean, he's got the maturity of an 8-year-old boy with the insecurity of a teenage girl. That's who he is.
How can he move his face? Now, he's got a new book out, and it's really a true reflection of Kerry. The book's awful, and it, too, is made from wood. But there is some news in there. Apparently, while the Trump administration was busy with their own foreign policy, Kerry was busy with his own.
There are people in the intelligence community who say that you've been telling the Iranians to wait out the President Trump and the administration and to wait until there's a Democratic president in 2021. Is that accurate?
Well, I think everybody in the world is sitting around talking about waiting out President Trump. Every Secretary of State, former Secretary of State, continues to meet with foreign leaders, goes to security conferences, goes around the world. We all do that.
See, that's what happens when an anchor actually reads the book. So I'm thinking holding secret meetings with a regime that's openly hostile to the American people seems a little like, what's that word? Hobby, backstabbing. Oh, how about collusion? Yeah, for 2 years, we've watched the media chase a phantom in an effort to undo an election. Meanwhile, Captain Corkboard here is meeting with the enemy, giving them cryptic advice on Trump.
By literally enemies of the president who were involved in that, and people that are involved with other Democratic operatives, and one particular oligarch who's quite corrupt, and that they would influence him. And I'm convinced from what I've heard from two very reliable people tonight that the president is surrounded by people who are enemies of the president and people who are, in at least one case, you know, clearly corrupt and involved in this scheme. And it's really a shame.
Okay, I don't know how to act as a diplomat. I fail horribly in that. I only know how to wear like one, but I'm an activist and I want to talk like an activist. I keep hearing the talk about everyone saying we're gonna negotiate this and that. In reality, I don't know who's gonna enforce that. Those saying there is nothing else besides political solution to the person who is doing everything in his power, it's not gonna solve the issue. Waiting Aleppo to fall apart like Daria is not gonna be a good solution for anyone. I think Al-Nusra Front is waiting us to beg. The civilians come to them and beg for help. And right now we are trying our allies, we are trying with the people we look alike, we think alike. But if they failed us, I don't think we should really criticize other options. Yeah, the siege of Aleppo is hard, the political solution is not working. I'm sorry, I know many of you spend all of their days on the political solution, but there is no such a thing. Because from the political solution started, we lost Daria, Ma'adamiya, and Al-Wa'ir. Aleppo is besieged. And first I worked on Aleppo is burning, and Amran, and Nashad for this. Since the Geneva Treaty, this whole event. When someone asks why Syrians don't have a huge face, that's why.
I understand.
So yesterday, I loved the statement yesterday, but I didn't know how we're going to enforce it. I loved your statement yesterday. It was like, and we have hopes still as Syrians. We keep saying like, have you heard what Kerry said yesterday? Norman was sharing it. And then later on we will come back to reality and saying like, okay, then who's going to enforce it?
That's right. Look, I get it. A lot of us wish there was an enforcement mechanism right now. A lot of us have been fighting for one. But we don't have one right now in that sense, so we're trying to pursue the diplomacy. And I understand it's frustrating. You have nobody more frustrated than we are. Michael's frustrated, I'm frustrated, Don's frustrated. It's, it's hard. The problem is that, you get quote enforcers in there, and then everybody ups the ante, right? Russia puts in more, Iran puts in more, Hezbollah is there more, and Nusra is more, and Saudi Arabia and Turkey put all their surrogate money in, and you all are destroyed. I mean, this is a problem, is figuring out how do you get people to a place of being rational. And that's what we're trying to do. We can always throw a lot of weapons in, but I don't think they're going to be good for you. And, people who are determined just to fight can destroy things completely, right? So we're trying to find a balance here to see if we can get to a negotiated process with an end to the violence while we do it. That's why we're fighting so hard for the cessation, so that you're not living day to day with fighting around you, but there's a political process that supplants the fighting. Nusra makes it hard. Nusra and Daesh both make it hard because you have this extreme element out there. And unfortunately, some of the opposition has already kind of chosen to work with them. Anyway, but let me listen to the rest of you before we hear what else.
أنا ما بدي حكينا كتير ما نسمع شو فيه. إحنا حابين نسمع صار اجتماع اليوم اللي هو كان على أساس اجتماع مهم لسوريا. حكينا كتير صار وصلنا كتير رسائل. أنا بتمنى نسمع إحنا شيء على اللي حكيناه يعني. ما بتمنى نعيد نفس الكلام مرة ثانية.
Guys, belongs to white helmets, by the way. So, should I translate that first?
Yes. I have to confess I heard only a part of that, but we've heard a lot of talk recently, and I don't want to repeat what I just said in the event prior to this, and we were hoping to get some of your reactions. And
I don't know what you said.
Okay, I will translate because I heard it from the beginning. Sorry.
Go ahead.
He said, I don't want to talk because we did as Syrians a lot of talks already, and you know what we were gonna see. But I knew you were in a really important meeting, and I wanted to ask you what happened in there. I wanted to know from you what's happened in that meeting.
So what happened is we told the Russians and the Iranians that we can't just do the same thing. We can't just go out and announce the ceasefire if there's no change to show that it's serious. Translation. What? Translation.
احنا اللي قلنا إن كنا بالاجتماع حكينا للروسيين والإيرانيين إنه ما بنقدر نضل نعمل نفس الشيء نفس المسلسل إنه نحكي إنه في وقف أعمال عدائية بس ما يكون جدي.
So we proposed to the Russians that they prove that they're serious by having no warplanes flying, no Assad planes flying for 7 days, at least, in order to prove to the opposition that they're not going to get killed if they're trying to help people or if the humanitarian assistance comes in, because it's the airplanes which have been causing most of the damage.
فإحنا اللي اقترحنا لروسيا إنه اثبتوا إنكم أنتم جديين من خلال إنه ما يكون في أي طيران للطائرات الحربية التابعة للنظام على الأقل 7 أيام عشان نفرجي المعارضة، نثبت للمعارضة إنه هم بيقدروا يعملوا العمل اللي بدهم إياه بدون ما يتم قصفهم، وبرضه نثبت إنه العمل الإنساني ممكن يتم بدون ما يتعرضوا الأشخاص اللي بيقوموا فيه بالقصف.
So the Russians were willing to offer 3 days, and we said that's not enough. That's a game. You know, you got to be serious here. The deal we made in Geneva said 7 days consecutive of calm before we would talk about focusing on Daesh and Nusra.
فالروسيين حكوا إنه رح يعطوا 3 أيام، بس إحنا حكينا هاي يعني لعبة، أنتم ما عم تكونوا جديين. إحنا الصفقة اللي اتفقنا عليها بجنيف تحكي 7 أيام وبعديها بيبدأ التعاون ضد النصرة وداعش.
So that's really where we had a lot of discussion. Many ministers felt that Russia needed to provide this guarantee.
فصار في كتير نقاش وكتير من الوزراء شعروا إنه روسيا لازم تعطي هاي الضمانة.
Some talked about increased monitoring, that we need to get monitoring in, which we all agree, but we're not sure who can do the monitoring and how they'll be safe.
ففي البعض اقترحوا إنه لازم يكون في مراقبة أكثر، رقابة أكثر، ولكن إحنا ما نعرف مين الجهة اللي ممكن تقوم بهذه الرقابة وقديش راح تكون آمنة.
And that's really what happened in the meeting. The Russians are sending the idea back to Moscow, and we'll learn tomorrow whether it's yes or no or some variation.
فالروسيين راح نقلوا هذه الأخبار لموسكو، بكرة راح نعرف إذا أو لا.
That's where we are.
هذا هو النقطة اللي إحنا فيها حاليا.
Thank you.
What is your idea of what would make a difference?
إيش فكرتك عن إيش كيف ممكن نغير أو يكون يحدث تغيير؟
هلا بصراحة أنا ما بتوقع الولايات المتحدة هي بحاجة لنظام رقابي بسوريا.
To be honest, I don't think the U.S. should have a monitoring role inside Syria.
It needs
to have monitoring.
في طائرات بدون طيار، في أقمار صناعية، في مؤسسات عاملة في سوريا، منظمات مجتمع مدني بسوريا، أكيد كلياته يعني بتوقع الأقمار الصناعية والطائرات بدون طيار بتطير في صفوف سوريا هي أكيد شايفة الخروقات اللي عم تصير بسوريا.
We have planes without pilots, there are satellites, we have civil society organizations working on the ground that can see these violations.
نحن صراحة بعد قصف القافلة الإنسانية من قبل الطيران السوري أو الروسي، ما تأكدنا نحن من نوع الطيران، تعرضنا صار قدرنا نحصل عدة تسريبات صوتية بتقول إنه رح يتم استهداف مراكز الدفاع المدني بعد الفيديو اللي طلع، وشفنا نحن تصريح وزارة الدفاع الروسي اللي بتقول إنه إذا بدكم تعرفوا من قصف الطيران من قصف القافلة يسألوا الوايت هاوس.
After the convoy was bombed by either Russia or Syria or the regime, we're not sure at this point, we received leaked voice messages that are saying that the white helmets or white helmets locations will be specifically targeted, and that if the Ministry of Defense is asked about what targeted those areas, they would say white helmets or the Syrian civil defense.
ما بتوقع روسيا هي قادرة تكون ضامنة للأسف، لأنه هي شريكة، لا تعتبر هي طرف سادس. احنا نعتبر روسيا هي شريكة مع النظام بقصف السوريين، بقتل، بقصف الأسواق الشعبية، بقصف حتى فرقنا اللي احنا سجلنا خلال من شهر السنة الماضية بداية التدخل الروسي من أول يوم حتى إسقاط أكثر من 17 شخص قتلوا من الدفاع المدني على أيدي بالقذائف الروسية.
We don't believe that Russia can be the guarantor of the actions of the regime. We see Russia as a partner of the regime in bombing Syrian civilians, marketplaces, even our own teams, the Syria civil defense teams. We've documented since the start of the Russian intervention in Syria, from day one until February of this year, more than 17 of our Syria civil defense personnel have been killed by Russian strikes.
Do you have any videos of the airplanes of these strikes?
هل عندكم فيديوز عن هذه الضربات من الطائرات؟
Can we get, I mean, I've been looking for videos for ages. I've been asking for them.
هل ممكن نحصل
We don't
عليهم؟
get
أنا
them
صرت فترة
sometimes.
بدور عنها.
في الفيديو أحد الفيديوهات المصور بسرمين يصور لحظة سقوط الصاروخ على عناصر دفاع مدني وهن عم يقوموا بإخلاء المدنيين. موجود على الإنترنت هلا ممكن نطلع.
So can I just say, we get a lot of videos of the victims of these attacks that are terrible, but they don't help us. We need videos of the actual aircraft and the munitions, and there's a lot of them on the internet, and we don't know whether they're real or not. So verified videos of the actual aircraft is the most useful thing.
And often when we see the videos of the aircraft, it's, and then, you know, in their defense, it's hard to capture the aircraft in the moment of dropping the bomb. So you see the aircraft, and then a few minutes later, there are people on the ground dying. But
Yeah, no, I understand.
What is actually very helpful is photographic or video evidence of the munitions, particularly if there are large fragments which can be identified.
Michael, by the way, do we have people in Aleppo where the trucks were hit looking for the munitions evidence?
Yeah, I understand they are actually.
Can you make sure of that? Can we get that back to us in a sort of verifiable?
Yeah, so I just heard today the UN actually wants to start taking that on in an organized way, to actually do some kind of a real team to go out and investigate it.
Well, they're going to jump on it before it all gets cleaned out of there.
And get the good people too. You can certainly tell if it's an advanced Russian munition.
Yeah.
That's the.
Right, but I mean, they've got to get right on it.
Yeah, and I think they are actually.
Would you check?
Yep.
Yeah, thank you. Who else?
I'm Dr. Mahmoud Mustafa from the Doctor Association. I prefer to continue in Arabic.
Okay.
هلا بعتذر إذا كلامي رح يكون قاسي، لأنه أنا طبيعتي طبيب جراح يعني، أو ممكن الشيء المر أو الشيء اللي شفناه، التجربة اللي عشناها هي خلتنا شوي يكون هيك قلوبنا قاسية. يعني نحن يعني أنا نحن مؤمنين إنه الكل متورط في النزاع في سوريا والكل جزء من الحل.
Yeah, absolutely. I apologize if what I'm going to say is a bit harsh. I'm a surgeon by profession, and just from what I've seen and what we've experienced, our hearts have hardened. I believe that everyone is involved at this point in the Syrian crisis, but that also means that they're part of the solution.
يعني نحن على ثقة إنه يعني لازم يكون في هناك أكشنز يعني أكثر من الولايات المتحدة بخصوص الموضوع في سوريا، يعني بخصوص الكرايسيس في سوريا. يعني نستغرب ليش الروس يعني واقفين بصف النظام بهي القوة، ودول أصدقاء سوريا يعني نشوف يعني في تخليات عن الموقف اللي السنة الماضية اللي يعني كل سنة عن سنة عم نشوف هناك تراجع بقراراتهم أو تراجع بكلامهم. يعني بالنهاية والكل بيعرف مين اللي بيخترق الهدنة، يعني لسه بحاجة لفيديو أو بحاجة لتصوير أو لإثباتات لهذا الموضوع. الكل الأمر واضح، لكن بحب بس أأكد عن موضوع فك الحصار في مدينة حلب. يعني موضوع
I believe that we need more action by the U.S. On Syria. We're confused as to why Russia is so strongly siding with the regime, whereas we find the Friends of Syria, their positions or their rhetoric weakens year by year. The violators of the cessation of hostilities are clear. Do we still need video and photographic evidence on this?
الموضوع يعني مو مجرد كلام، يعني لازم يكون في هناك تدخلات فعلية، يعني خلق نوع من التوازن. يعني مثل ما ذكرنا الروس واقفين بموقف قوي بجانب النظام بتدخل عسكري بقراراته بمجلس الأمم. يعني نحن نتمنى يعني المعاملة بالمثل تقريبا يعني من الولايات المتحدة في هذا الخصوص.
And I also want to stress the point of the need to break the siege of Aleppo. I don't want to have to continue to talk about this. We need actual intervention. So I really feel that there needs to be a balance. As I mentioned, there's a very strong Russian position siding with the regime. Whether it's through their military intervention or the decisions and votes that they take inside the Security Council, and we expect similar support from the U.S. and from our friends.
Can I just build on this point in particular about the Russians? Because we believe that there is a deep contradiction between the strategic objectives of the United States of America and the Russians in Syria. The Russians would love to see, as soon as possible in Syria, just only Bashar al-Assad from one side and ISIS from the other side, and destroy any kind of moderate opposition on the ground, and to put the world into the choice that you have to choose between Bashar al-Assad and ISIS. We do not understand, and this has been the case since 2012, since Geneva Communique. We do not understand how it can be expected from the Russians to change attitude and to behave differently and to come up to a strategy that has common objectives with the Americans and with the Syrians and with the international community to abide with the UNSC resolutions.
Well, the problem is the Russians don't care about international law, and we do. And we don't have a basis, our lawyers tell us, unless we have a UN Security Council resolution, which the Russians can veto, and the Chinese, or unless we are under attack from the folks there, or unless we are invited in. Russia is invited in by the legitimate regime. Well, it's illegitimate normally, but by the regime. And so they were invited in, and we're not invited in. We're flying in airspace there where they can turn on the air defense, and we have a very different scene. The only reason they're letting us fly is because we're going after ISIL. If we were going after Assad, those air defenses, we'd have to take out all the air defenses. And we don't have a legal justification, frankly, for doing that, unless we stretch it way beyond the law on a humanitarian basis, which some people argue we should, by the way. But so far, American legal theory has not bought into the so-called right to protect. And we don't even have what we had in Kosovo, where we had a existing resolution and so forth, even though we went alone. So it's complicated. It's not easy. And we've been fighting. How many wars have we been fighting? We've been fighting in Afghanistan. We've been fighting in Iraq. We've been fighting, in the region for 14 years. And a lot of Americans don't believe that we should be fighting and sending young Americans over to die in another country. That's the problem. Congress won't vote to do it. And you can be mad at us, but what we're trying to do is help Syrians to fight for their own country. And we've been spending a lot of money, a lot of effort to try to help do this. So there's an opposition there. The opposition is doing very well. Russia came in. That's a problem, I know, because we don't behave like Russia.
It's just a different standard. So we're trying to see whether we can put to test whether Russia is serious about a political solution. And if they're not serious, then we will help the opposition more. But I don't think you're going to, I don't think that's particularly good for the citizens of Syria in the end, because it means more fighting.
Pardon me, I would like to add something about the practical point that now the world always focused on the extremist Sunni groups fighting in Syria. And in Vienna communique, when the agreement spoke about having a credible and non-sectarian governance in Syria, that was difficult to sell to the communities on the ground and to our fellows and to our activists, because it speaks only about the extremist Sunnis and ignores the extremist Shia fighters who are coming from Iran, from Hezbollah and Lebanon, from Iraq and the other areas.
Well, they're a terrorist organization. We've designated them a terrorist organization.
Yeah, but according to the Russian-American agreement, the airstrikes in Syria would be only against the extremist Sunnis.
Yeah, because the reason for that is that they have both basically declared war on us and are plotting against us. And Hezbollah is not plotting against us. Hezbollah is exclusively focused on Israel, whom they're not attacking now, and on Syria, where they are attacking in support of Assad. So it's
No, I entirely understand your position as representing the American interest, because these Shia groups, they do not attack the United States, of course. But how to make the majority of the Syrian people accept this approach?
I'm sorry, what?
How to make the Syrian people accept this argument that because Hezbollah or Fadl Abbas, the Iraqi and the Iranian groups are not fighting the United States now, so they are not targeted by the attacks against terrorism in Syria. They kill Syrians.
They are targeted by the opposition. And we are arming. So, and training.
Okay, I will object to that, can I?
Sure.
I'm from Aleppo, and I'm a social media activist. So I worked for 6 campaigns over Aleppo in the last 6 years. Do you know how many there for Aleppo? How many social media campaigns asking for protection for Aleppo?
How many?
Maybe 1 or 2. In Aleppo we have 6. We have almost each 6 months we have 1. So it's not to me, convincing me it's a battle against ISIS is really hard. Because we lost Daria. Daria is like our sweetest romantic dream of the revolution. And we lost it last month. So what we are moving forward is another experience of Iraq, where ISIS is there controlling half of the country. Half of the population feel that it's an existent battle and their only exit with it will be ISIS. So I don't want this scenario for Syria. So we are arming people to fight for Syria? I don't think we are. I think in reality, we are not arming the right people enough. That's why we are losing Aleppo right now. And I don't want it to be here next year when we're going to discuss how we lost Aleppo and there is still Idlib and Raqqa. So in reality, there is not enough political and armed support to those who consider them moderate. I wish we had his friends, not because they don't respect the international law, but because they are his friends.
Well, let me ask you, Michael. I mean, I think we've been putting an extraordinary amount of arms in, haven't we?
Yeah, and I have to say, as you said, it's a double-edged sword, because you give people the ability to defend themselves, but when you pump more weapons into a situation like Syria, it doesn't end well for Syrians, because there's always somebody else that's willing to pump more weapons in for the other side. The armed groups in Syria get a lot of support. not just from the United States, but from other partners. And we've never said that that
Qatar, Russia, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, huge amount of weapons coming in, huge amount of money.
But pumping weapons in causes someone else to pump more weapons in, and you end up with a level.
I mean, the reason Russia came in is because ISIL was getting stronger. Daesh was threatening the possibility of going to Damascus and so forth. And that's why Russia came in, because they didn't want a Daesh government. And they supported Assad. And we know that this was growing. We were watching. We saw that Daesh was growing in strength. And we thought Assad was threatened. We thought, however, we could probably manage, that Assad might then negotiate. Instead of negotiating, you got Assad. Now you got Putin to support him. So it's truly complicated. I mean, you know how complicated it is. You live in it. But for us politically, where we have a Congress that will not authorize our use of force, Congress will not pass that. And so we're trying to help the best way we can, but we finally decided the best thing we can do is try to find a way to have a political solution where the opposition is part of the government. And you can have an election and let the people of Syria decide. Who do they want? You don't believe in an election?
Let's go and elect Hitler then. Yeah, I don't. I think that there is accountability to that person. He killed a million.
Well, why can't you have accountability at the ballot box?
And what?
Why can't you have an election run by the international community?
Which we don't trust already. Okay, then.
Well, you got to start somewhere.
Okay,
If the international community sets up an election under the strictest standards of elections, and people in all the camps and all the diaspora are allowed to vote, which was the agreement. So in Jordan they can vote, in Turkey they can vote, in Lebanon they can vote, in America they can vote, in London they can vote. Everybody who's registered as a refugee anywhere in the world can vote. Are they going to vote for Assad? Assad's scared of this happening. Very scared of this happening. We know this. We know this from intelligence and we know it from the Russians. So, democracy has some virtues, folks.
The majority of your guests are arriving.
I'm coming.
Foreign ministers.
So anyway, I don't dismiss that automatically. Think about how it could work.
But the problem is when we want international law, we use it on the table. When it is related to accountability to dictatorship that killed 1 million, then international law is not important anymore. Torture doesn't go by election. Genocide doesn't go by election. Thank God activists around the world push forward that international law, put those as a big no. So if we wanted to stick to the international law, we keep sticking to the international law. But when it's on the best interest of the major powers, we will say the international law won't allow us to intervene. But when it's the base case, let's go to election and elect Bashar al-Assad. Anyone is not going to approve that. So we are discussing a scenario that's not going to happen.
And my belief, if the Russians are supporting this agreement, it means that they are going to manipulate these elections and re-elect Bashar al-Assad. And they have the ability, they have the resources, they are controlled over half of the country, over half of the population with iron. So they have all possible,
How would you not? What about the Syrians who are still inside Syria and the areas under control of the regime itself? They don't have free choice.
They will go by power to elect him.
We lived that. We know that Syrians under control of the Mukhabara, the security intelligence of the Ba'ath party, they would not dare, regardless if they are observers from all the world, they do not dare to go to the elections and say no.
They give me the papers of my mother incidents and gave me to sign it that they didn't kill her. They give me answer to sign it.
How many people is that? That's a few million people, correct?
It's
how many
still
people
almost
are displaced?
40%.
And how many people are displaced? 12 million?
How many of those who are displaced have families still inside Syria and they are afraid of? We can debate that. We are debating, should we go and...
So you think the only solution is for somebody to come in and get rid of Assad?
Yes.
That's the only solution? Who's that going to be? Who's going to do that?
3 years ago, I would say you, but right now I don't know.
Well, look, it's a hard choice. I'm sorry. It's, we've lost thousands of young Americans in a lot of countries. And it's pretty difficult right now to get Americans to say, we're going to send Americans to invade another country and have a war with Sunni and Shia and extremists and everybody. I mean, it's more complicated than you think.
Nobody requests an invasion.
What?
Nobody requests an invasion.
Well, you got to win the war. You got to come in and occupy cities. You've got to go in city for city and fight against people who have IEDs and people who have sniper rifles. It's complicated. And people now who may have gas and other things. So it is not easy. I'm just telling you, it's not easy. There are lots of places in the world where people want to hold our coat while we go fight. But it's not easy. And we're trying to empower Syrians to be able to fight against this guy. Now the Russians have changed the equation, unfortunately. The Russians have changed the equation. And it's a little more complicated. So we're trying to figure out a way to get to the table, if we can, and save lives. I don't think any country has worked harder to save lives than we have. We've given more money than any other nation for refugees regarding Syria. And we're trying very hard to try to provide access for humanitarian goods to get in to save lives. Doctor, I know you have, need for medical supplies. You need to save lives. We're trying to make it possible for you to do that. We're not disengaged. We're not saying, oh, we're sorry, we can't do anything. We're saying we're going to try and do as much as we can within, the scope of what we can do here.
Mr. Secretary, the UN, Bashar al-Assad gave up his chemical test arsenal under the threat of using force again. This is the only case when he responded to the UN security. And partially, the transition, according to Geneva Communique, is part of UNSC 2118. He did not abide that part. He abided only to the chemical work.
I think you're looking at 4 people in the administration who have all argued for your support. And I've lost the argument. I've argued for your support. I stood up, I'm the guy who stood up and announced we're going to attack Assad because of the weapons. And then, things evolved into a different process. But the bottom line is that the Congress refused even to vote to allow that. Tony Blair went to Parliament, lost that vote.
Okay, I have one question then. What is the bottom line? How many Syrians? What is the bottom line? Because chemical is there and it wasn't the bottom line. Hospitals, it was the title.
You mean the red line?
Yeah, no, what is the end of it? What we can do and it be the end of it?
Well,
not clear?
I
don't know because I
think people in Washington right now are deeply frustrated, as you are. And we are talking about what enforcement mechanisms could we now take. And it may be that we will lift up the options because of the frustration, because of Assad's indifference to anything. So there's a different conversation taking place because of what's happened in the last few days. We'll see what happens.
I believe the United States is capable of making the air force that Bashar al-Assad is using to send his weapons against civilians out of service without sending any soldier.
That he's what? Capable?
Without sending any soldier, just no-fly zone, impose a no-fly zone.
Well, there's more and more talk. We're trying to get what we call an agreed-upon no-fly zone. And that's what we're trying to get. The Russians have agreed that if we get this process going, Assad won't fly. And that's what attracted us to this equation, was the idea that we might get a no-fly zone. But if we're going to force a no-fly zone, we have to attack every air defense. And then we have to be willing to fly airplanes every day to enforce it. And it's very costly and it's a big deal.
On the long term, I think it's cost effective.
What?
On the long term, because if we did it in 2012, it would have been without ISIS. If we do it in 2013, right now in 2016. So cost effectively.
Well, in 2012, a lot of us were saying we should be sending people in and helping you. I'm frustrated too. I get it. Everybody at this table wants to do more.
معك دقيقة معك دقيقة لتشوف كيف يموت. We have 1 minute, Secretary. معك دقيقة لتشوف كيف يموت.
I said, do you have 1 minute to see how we in civil defense we adapt?